Right. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of the Free American Hour. I am your host, Clayton Douglas. My guest today is Dr. Michael Reznichek. Did I get it right that time, Michael?
Yes, you did, Clayton.
All right. He has a new book out. It's called Blowing Smoke: Rethinking the War on Drugs Without Prohibition and Rehab. You're not exactly going to have a hostile audience, Doctor.
That's good. Too early in the morning for that.
Too early in the morning. But as my little intro there warns, you know, I have had what I seem an abnormal number of guests that have been confronted or looked at and intimidated by the FBI or other agencies out there. And one of the reasons maybe for that is that I've been advocating the legalization of all drugs, the abolishment of all victimless crimes, and a reduction of our penal system. But I'm just an old right-wing, radical, anti-government, pot-smoking hippie, you know? But you're a doctor, you're a psychiatrist, you're an MD, and you say in chapter 13 that legalizing drugs will cause many reasonable people to fear an epidemic of out-of-control drug use. Such fears, though, are stoked by those who have financial interest in the drug war and don't reflect on what would really happen if we stopped enabling substance abusers. The chapter addresses how we can legalize drugs for adults but maintain prohibition for children, and how legalization would drastically change the role of the medical profession and its monopoly on by-prescription-only medications. And finally, the herbal model can be shown to be a better fit and offer more effective interventions for other deviant behaviors. What's happening, Doctor? Now, I report, and I've backed a lot of people like Normal and Jack Hara, who wrote the book Emperor Wears No Clothes. You know, they stole our billion-dollar crop back in 1933, took it to Russia, took it to China, and made it illegal for you to grow it, for us to grow it here in America, whether we smoked it or not. What about that? What got you started on this? What inspired you to write this book as a psychiatrist and you're an MD, right?
Yes, I am. This book idea started when I was in my residency training as well as in medical school, and I began to see how politicized the medical profession had become. There's a lot of things that the medical profession says and positions they take that really don't come from medical science, but they come more from politics, their own, the institution's own political self-interest. And there's a lot of that goes on. And then I began to take a particular interest in substance abuse. And in this book, what I do is I look at the main reason that we have a drug war in this country, which is the disease model of substance abuse. And this model forms the basis of every legal approach we have to prohibition in the whole drug war. The UN's single convention on narcotic drugs is based on this disease model, and that's our legal basis to fight a federal drug war. But anyway, I went through the history of this disease model and the science behind it, and I was just appalled. I mean, when I was in my training, I had hunches that the medical profession was overstepping. But it wasn't until I went back and reviewed the history of where this came from and reviewed what we currently know from neuroscience, and this is nothing but junk science. We should not be fighting a drug war. There are better ways to help control substance abuse, but prohibition and rehab are not the right approaches.
It cost us $50,000 a year to incarcerate an individual on a drug crime, and I've documented in my books that it's the CIA, it's the Mossad, it's the secret intelligence agencies that are spread around the world that are bringing these drugs into this country, that are facilitating it. And they're doing it so they can incarcerate Americans. We have more Americans incarcerated today in prisons working for slave laborers for some large American companies in some instances, and we got more than China or Russia with 3 times our population in China. Is this all purposeful? Is this a? I mean, I've just put links up to the White Holocaust. This is where 60,000 white Russian Christians were starved to death or imprisoned or incarcerated in when the Soviet Union took over Russia. Is that same thing happen here? I mean, if we've got more people in prison now than China or Russia does, isn't that happening here?
Well, it is. You know, we have 5% of the world's population, but 25% of its prisoners. Let me say that I think what goes on here, you know, I don't think government people, for the most part, they don't wake up in the morning and say, you know, how can I deceive, how can I screw the American public? What happens is they get a paradigm in their head, a way of looking at the world. And most of the drug warriors in government really think they're just helping out the folks. You know, they view substance abuse as a genetic brain disease, and they think that prohibition and throwing, you know, establishing this big rehab industry, that this is the way to help the folks. And you really got to look at this paradigm, and that's what my book is all about. It looks at the whole basis for this drug war and shows, again, that it's junk science. It's not the way to control substance abuse. There are better ways, and actually the case I make in my book is the first step to controlling the drug problem is to legalize drugs. You have to bring drug use back into society as a cultural norm. What we've done is we've pushed all drug users, marijuana users, out of civil society into their own little outlaw groups and social cliques and gangs. They develop horrible drug habits, horrible social habits, and then we go after them and enable them with rehab, with welfare, with all kinds of things that just enable that lifestyle, and then we wonder why we have so many addicts in the country.
To me, one of the things, I met a nice lady. She had a lot of problems, but she had been in an automobile accident, and they had weaned her off of the morphine with the methadone. Now, I mean, this is just you're drugging drug addicts to keep them from doing drugs. I have been in this culture. I helped start the paraphernalia industry. I helped start High Times. I financed Jack Harrow while he was writing Emperor Wears No Clothes. Helped him start a shop, and was the first distributor for High Times. Welcomed them to the industry, and things have gotten a little bit better. But I wrote about this situation in a science fiction novel 40 years ago. That at least all but 4 states have legalized, abolished all laws against victimless crimes, and they got a pretty peaceful, relaxed society. And in 4 closed states, or what I called in my novel straight states, they were still putting people in prison. Hey son, what's that you got in your pocket? Oh boy, you're going to jail. Now I don't think to me that's living in a police state. I wrote about this ideal society 40 years ago. That'll be coming out next year. But was it science fiction then? Is it science fiction now? Or has the whole trend to recognizing the medicinal benefits and the food benefits of hemp offset this whole propaganda war to get the prohibition on drugs to enable the secret intelligence agencies to profit off of our misery? Maybe that's just my opinion. That's my outlook on this. But I wrote about it.
Yeah, and I think there's some, there's some truth to that. Again, you have to look at the political incentives for the various stakeholders in this drug war. Law enforcement is one big stakeholder. You know, they can go out and arrest somebody who's harmlessly just smoking a little marijuana. They can arrest them, throw them into the criminal justice system, and they can really look at that. And again, they're just protecting the folks because they view drug abuse as this horrible disease. And when you wake up in the morning with that sort of outlook in life, you can justify pretty much anything you want to do to drug abusers or drug users, even if they're hurting no one but themselves. If they're hurting themselves at all, and in most cases, like with marijuana, they're helping themselves. There's nothing wrong. In fact, everything that people say negative about illegal drugs, that was said 80, 90 years ago about alcohol. And look how we managed to incorporate alcohol into this culture. We've removed all the stigma associated with it, and we really don't have much of a problem with alcohol in this society. In fact, we do even better with alcohol if we got rid of the disease model of alcohol abuse.
Ayn Rand told us in Atlas Shrugged, if the government has no power over honest citizens, so they have to make criminals out of us. And that seems to be the whole strategy. They made criminals out of our grandfathers and our great uncles for making the fuel for their Model A's and Model T's.
That's exactly right. And, this goes back to a progressive political movement of the early to mid 20th century. And back then, that whole progressive mindset, it still exists today. That mindset was, the masses are weak and helpless, and they're kind of ignorant, and they need really smart people in government to show them how to live, show them how to take care of their health. And, we've lost sight of the fact that the people who are saying that, those progressives, they're just, it's all about it. It's all about them. It's all about them wanting to see themselves as protecting the folks. And until we attack this disease model, we're not going to make too many inroads into legalization. And that's why I wrote this book. Somebody had to take on this disease model. I'm in the profession. I'm in the business. I work in the prisons. I've worked in the communities. I know substance abusers, the worst heroin addicts, the worst meth addicts, and I tell you, they're not as helpless as progressives would like to imagine.
This whole model that you're talking about, as part of the problem here, I mean, I've got a little chart up on my website somewhere. The 0 people have ever been killed by smoking marijuana. None. More people have died from aspirin. And it's also good for us. It's healthy for us. But and about 15,000 people a year die from meth or heroin or cocaine, injecting themselves. But 20,000 die from prescription medication or more. And Ron Paul is the first presidential candidate that got up and spoke in favor of restarting the hemp industry in America, and abolishing victimless crimes, or legalizing, however the semetics work. Is it turning around? He's speaking for the legalization. You're speaking for the legalization, and people have asked me, well, Clay, marijuana is a gateway drug, isn't it? Well, yeah, absolutely. If you got to go to a drug dealer to buy it, if you can buy it from your neighbor who's growing it in his backyard, we don't have any criminal. We wouldn't have, if we legalized it, we wouldn't have any the flood of illegals who are making their living by bringing the drugs up here that are illegal here.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's a good point. How many people have died in the last year from the alcohol trade or the tobacco trade in this country? 0. But I guarantee you, the government were to outlaw alcohol again and outlaw nicotine or tobacco products, we have much more violence and deaths in society. It'd be horrible. But that's just what we have with illegal drugs right now. Mexico, since they stepped up their drug war about 5 years ago, they've had about 45,000 deaths down there in northern Mexico along the border, and those deaths have been brutal. That's what happens when you enforce prohibition. It takes a horrible toll on society.
What what about the pharmaceutical industry? Now, normally, you know, I'm not very much a very big fan of of doctors of the pharmaceutical industry. I know what the markup is. You got 200,000% profit on some of the medications, and to me, the medications are doing the damage. I mean, I was hospitalized for a motorcycle accident, and the motorcycle, I had 3 broken ribs and a bump on the head, but they drugged me for 3 months. For 3 months for 3 broken ribs. Halcyon, Haldol, Valium, morphine, and when I got out of the hospital, I refused to take any more medications, and I feel fine. I don't feel like the medical profession tried to help me. I think they tried to kill me. And what about the drugging of Americans here? Isn't the same thing happening to Americans with Valium and Luvox and all these other psychoactive substances? That isn't that the same thing that happened to the Chinese during the Opium Wars?
That's true. The pharmaceutical industry, in connection with the medical profession, you know, they have a monopoly on legal drugs, and doctors, you know, they're concerned about their patients, but there's nobody that's better concerned about their own individual well-being than a patient, him or herself. And I would get rid of this whole by prescription only business, and I would let people be able to access pharmaceutical drugs on their own. Now, they can go to their doctor and get advice, but I think the only way to control this nonsense is to make people responsible for their own behavior. If they have pain and they want to go get methadone or they want to go get Vicodin, let them go do it. And if they don't use it right, they'll have nobody to blame but themselves. And I guarantee you, people will take care of themselves. As long as we remove all the forbidden fruit, as long as we remove all the stigma, let's put people in charge of their own lives. If they don't like what drugs are doing to them, they can change them on their own, or they can go to a doctor and get some advice. But that whole business of by prescription only has a fascinating history, and I deal with it in my book. It was never, to give doctors a monopoly on drugs was never done because people were self-medicating in harmful ways. It was all about shifting the legal liability for drugs from the drug companies to the medical profession. The drug companies, they didn't want to have to give all this information to patients on each drug they gave or each drug they sold, which was what the FDA was forcing them to do. But beginning in 1938, the FDA began to allow drug companies to release them from liability for any untoward effect as long as they said on the package, by prescription only. That way the medical profession picked up the liability, and they were only too willing to do that, you know, because they had financial
this whole pharmaceutical medical big pharma thing is all basically a conspiracy, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, again, the FDA officials and the people in Congress at the time, you know, didn't think they were conspiring to pull a fast one on the American people, but in effect they did. And nobody protested. No common Americans like you and me protested that move, because back then everybody thought that doctors and the scientific community was just so damn smart and they were going to protect the folks. Well, it hasn't turned out that way.
Yeah, and folks, you know, I'm sure your senators, you know, are under careful advisement by the military and the KGB when they pass this NDAA law suspending posse comitatus and allowing the governments to use the military against us. It's escalating here, and I have a feeling, Michael, that you're probably not too popular in the medical profession in your areas, are you?
Well, on issues like this, I am not. I'm outspoken. Now, I'm a psychiatrist, and for people who have true mental illness, I'm I consider myself as good or better than any other psychiatrist out there. But I have a very narrow view of what mental illness is, because a lot of what passes for mental illness is nothing but bad behavior and things that are just character flaws that we should not be absorbing into the healthcare profession. People complain about high healthcare costs. Well, it's because everything comes to medicine. Everything comes to the medical profession, and it shouldn't.
Hasn't it been pretty definitively proven that smoking marijuana is not harmful? It's beneficial. Eating hemp, eating the hemp plant as a vegetable is beneficial, and hemp oil concentrated has been shown to combat cancer.
You're absolutely right. And
now, why would they want to put you in jail for, it's like I almost don't qualify for medical marijuana, because since I've been smoking it for 40 years, I don't have anything wrong with me. I don't go to a doctor. I don't take any kind of pharmaceuticals whatsoever.
Well, the reason the feds and state officials continue to go after marijuana smokers is, again, they wake up in the morning and say they need to protect the folks. It's their job to keep people healthy, and they're doing the Lord's work in their head, and that's what they're doing. They're chasing down marijuana users, and it's horrible. It's immoral.
What's the difference between doing that and rounding up the Jews, the communist Jews in Germany? What's the difference exactly? I mean, can we identify that?
Yeah, there isn't much difference, because in Germany, listen, they woke up and said, we need to get rid of the Jews for the good of the German culture. They were doing what was right in their own head, and I tell you, when you give people power corrupts, and people begin to think like that.
So what is the answer? I mean, you as you pointed out here, and let's see, we got about 6 minutes on this recording segment. We in intelligent conversation we can agree on this, but this is almost like a witch hunt. It's like the Dark Ages all over again, And we used to in the '60s, we'd go to the movie theater, take a doobie and smoke it, and watch Reefer Madness on at midnight, and laugh our asses off. But Hearst got that castle up there. William Randolph Hearst got that castle up there by demonizing marijuana and equating the whole idea of hemp, which was our #1 cash crop at the time, equating that as a drug and taxing it like a drug.
Yeah, Hearst was a big advocate of demonizing marijuana, largely because that threatened his paper business, his wood products paper business. The other big corporate interest back in the early 20th century was DuPont. In the 1930s, they had just patented nylon, and they were threatened by the hemp industry because it was a much superior fabric. And what's interesting is that Andrew Mellon, who was the Secretary of the Treasury for the United States back in the 1930s, at his family bank, Mellon Bank in Pittsburgh, they financed most of DuPont's business activity. Well, listen to this. Mellon's niece married Mr. Anslinger, who was the head of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, appointed by Andrew Mellon himself, and it was Harry Anslinger and the FBN who really demonized marijuana and went after marijuana smokers. It's a horrible connection of politics and corporate self-interest.
And they did it by playing the race card too, just like they tell everybody today, oh, Clay Douglas, he's a racist. Even when I have black men on my show, I'm still a racist because I'm pointing out this kind of thing.
Right. That's how they did it, because back then there were a lot more racists in the country, and when you played the race card, you basically appealed to people like that, and it had a lot of political power. But that's what Anslinger did, and most of the drug warriors back then. blacks, Hispanics, the Chinese, they played that card to drum up support for drug laws, and it worked.
I've told people, you got a lot of good Christians out there that are scared to death of this. They're scared to death that somehow this is going to creep in and hook their children, and I think that's all. I think that's all bull. I think that's that we're talking about substances that have been on this earth for 10,000 years, and used by people for 10,000 years. And if somebody can come up to you with a badge and say, "What's that you got in your pocket there, son?" That's a police state, isn't it?
You're exactly right. And again, they have that mindset that they're just out there protecting everybody. But you're right. Marijuana, opium, alcohol, cocaine, these drugs have been used for millennia, tens of thousands of years. And societies had a workable solution on how to control them. That is, they let everybody consume whatever they wanted, but they let people bear the consequences of any misuse. If you lost your job because you were too drunk, government didn't come around and prop you up and give you unemployment payments. You were left to starve in the ditch if you used drugs too much. And so, legal sanctions were always reserved for any drug use that harmed other people, as they should be. DUI laws and things like that. We don't want our airline pilots high when they're flying across the country. Those laws still will be in place and probably should be strengthened in many cases. But for the most part, embed drug use as a cultural norm, legalize drugs, and let people bear the consequences of their own behavior. And one of the points I make in my book, if you want to help control drug abuse, then if you have a family member who's overusing, then you ought to bring some harsh consequences to them. Kick them out of the house. Don't invite them over for dinner until they straighten up. And when you have those sorts of embedded cultural controls, you're not going to have a drug problem.
You're absolutely right. And I've researched this whole thing from top to bottom. I've done everything out there. I wanted to know what it was. I wanted to know. So, because if you don't understand, if you haven't tested this, if you don't have the scientific evidence in front of you, or the practical experience, if you don't have the money, then you're knowledgeable, and you can pass that knowledge on to our children. I mean, I've got boys that that run businesses, that run established businesses, that grew up understanding what all this stuff was, and that's one of matter of fact, it turned me on to one of my guests. That's Roger Christie out of Hawaii, who, since he's been on my radio show, has been imprisoned by the feds as a flight risk from Hawaii. Give me a break. And that's a man that started the THC Ministries of Hawaii. Familiar with that?
No, I'm not.
He's basically said, hey, hemp is the plant of renown the Bible talks about. It's been around for 10,000 years. This is my sacrament. This is the way we get in touch with God. We smoke a little bit of cannabis. And they put him in jail. This is and this is what we're facing. This is what I'm talking about on my website right now. We're talking about, if I'm talking against the government and the government's drug laws, does that make me a terrorist? Am I somehow a threat to the American system here? I don't think so. But that's what they're trying to do, to demonize anybody that's standing up for sane laws, constitutional laws. We're being subjected to this, aren't we?
We are. Yeah, you're stepping on their toes. The officials see it as their job to protect people from evil drugs, and you step on their toes whenever you advocate for legalization.
No wonder they've been so pissed off at me for the last 45 years. And what answers do you come up with? Let's talk about your book here. Let's talk about your book. Hang on, let me